All right, we cracked the 200 participants mark, so let's get this show off the road. My name is Roderick Hefferputz, and I'm the director of the EU office of the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, the German political foundation affiliated with the German Green Party. And I would like to wholeheartedly welcome you all to this webinar, where we will analyze the results of the German federal elections that just took place a couple of days ago on Sunday. And we want to look at what are the election results implications for the future of Europe. I'm really excited to have so many participants from all over the world, Europe, all over the world, joining us. But before we start, let me share you just a little bit of more information and some housekeeping rules to ensure a smooth event. First, this Zoom webinar is also being live streamed on YouTube. So you will also be able to watch the recording after the event. If there were any particular points that were of particular interest to you, you can always revert back to the YouTube recording and look at those over there. Second, at any moment, you can write your questions in the Q&A box. We're going to collect the questions and then we will post them to the panelists later during this webinar. Please be mindful, respectful, and constructive, and ideally state your name and affiliation when you ask your questions or post your comment. Now, before we start the webinar though, let's just look back a couple of days ago. What happened? Let's take a look at a few of the snapshots of the election results. We got a slide here with the Bundestag hemicycle shifts. And there we can see we had a lot of colors, quite a number of parties represented. The left, the SPD, Greens, FDP, the Liberals, the BSV. And then if we click on 2025, the election result, what happened then? Suddenly, we got a little bit less colorful situation in the Bundestag. The FDP didn't make it back again. The BSV, the new party from Sarah Wagenknecht, didn't make it in. The left had a big increase with 36 seats. Big punishment against the governing coalition. SPD loses 87 seats. FDP loses 90, falls out of the Bundestag. Greens lose 32 seats as well. A little gain for the CDU-CSU with 12 seats. And regrettably, quite a big gain for the far-right Alternative für Deutschland, which doubles their seats from 76 to 152 seats. Now, if we look at the next slide, you will see that there are a number of different coalition possibilities. There's, of course, the Große Koalition, although maybe not so grand anymore, not so groß anymore, of the Conservatives and the Social Democrats. 208 seats plus the 120 seats makes up a majority. There would, of course, also be the additional possibility to have a Kenya, after the Kenyan flag, coalition of the Conservatives, Social Democrats, and the Greens. They would have a very comfortable majority of 413 seats, but it looks very unlikely. And last but not least, theoretically, mathematically, there would be the possibility of a coalition between the conservative CDU-CSU and the far-right AfD. But the conservatives have already ruled out that they will not go into a government with the AfD. And so this leaves for us mostly the Grand Coalition. And already talks are going to be on the way. And there is the plan by Friedrich Merz to have these talks, these negotiations conclude by the Easter time so that a new coalition between the Conservatives and the Social Democrats will be in power then. Now, on this basis, it is my pleasure to present Dr. Jana Puglierin. Jana is Senior Policy Fellow and Head of the Berlin office at the European Council of Foreign Relations. Her work focuses on German and European foreign, security, and defense policy, as well as on Germany's role in Europe and transatlantic relations, issues that I think couldn't be more timely right now. Jana, how do you look at this election results, and what do you expect? What do they mean for the European Union? The floor is all yours.
Yeah, so maybe I make three quick points as an introduction. So the Conservatives have clearly won the election. Friedrich Merz is likely going to be the next chancellor, and the whole country took a turn to the right. But the CDU is below 30%, and I think this is significant because that was their, I think, internal benchmark. They were polling around 30% for a long while, and I think the result is somewhat disappointing. So the CDU won, but it doesn't feel like a huge victory. And I think that has implications for the role and position of Friedrich Merz. I mean, I don't want to overstate this. Angela Merkel had a very weak result when she became chancellor for the first time, and she remained German chancellor for a long while. But Friedrich Merz will be closely watched by Markus Söder in Bavaria and Henrik Wüst in North Rhine-Westphalia, two competitors for his candidacy. And I think he will have a difficult start. So that's my first point. On my second point, so on your coalitions, I think a so-called grand coalition, a 2.5 party coalition, counting the CSU as half a party, is, I think, the only feasible option. I don't expect the CDU and CSU to enter a coalition with the AfD. So that makes the Social Democrats very strong, gives them a very strong hand. I think they're in a good position to negotiate, although they have achieved the worst result in their history. But because there is literally only very little alternative to governing with them, I think they can demand a lot. And the third point, and that is, I think, especially relevant for Europe, is that something that observers have worried about has now happened. There is a so-called blocking minority in the German parliament that makes it difficult to change Germany's basic law and therefore the debt brake, to make changes, additions, exemptions, and also to come up with a new special fund like the one that was issued after Russia's full-scale invasion. Interestingly, one day makes a lot of difference. Friedrich Merz, who was staunchly against taking on more debt for defense and wanted to be sure that there are adequate cuts in any budget beforehand, has now changed his opinion and tries to move a 200 billion special fund through the German parliament even before the new parliament constitutes itself, so with the old majorities. It is by no means certain that this will fly, but that shows you that there is an awareness that Germany needs to find the money for especially the expenses for defense. And that there might be a problem if this move now fails with the new incoming government. The blocking majority consists of the AfD and Die Linke, the left party. So the left party is not generally opposed to modernizing, reforming, or getting rid of the debt brake, but they are very reluctant to do this for the purpose of increasing the defense spending because they see this as a militarization of Germany and Europe. So for now, money remains an issue and will constrain the government's room for maneuver. Even if they come up with a special fund for the German armed forces, that does not solve the problem of Germany's defense spending. It's not a sustainable solution. And the problem with the debt brake then remains in place. And maybe I leave it with this, and we can talk more foreign policy later in the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Jana. If I can follow up with one little question, actually, because I wonder whether we need to look at these national discussions on the budget and the money in the context also on European discussions with the budget and the money. How do you see the chances of, let's say, Eurobonds for European defense? Have they increased now with Friedrich Merz? Have they decreased? Will they increase if Friedrich Merz doesn't manage to overcome this blocking majority or get this special fund going? How do you see that development?
So first of all, maybe on Friedrich Merz and his position towards Europe, I take a lot of hope from the fact that he was socialized in the European Parliament. He is influenced by Helmut Kohl and Wolfgang Schäuble. Money-wise, that's maybe not that good news, but still he claims that he is a very committed pro-European. He has criticized the traffic light coalition constantly for not having shown enough leadership on the European level. He has criticized the amount of German votes that we've seen. So he seems destined to bring Germany back to Europe, at the heart of Europe, and to make it a leader in Europe again. On bonds, he was very, very critical throughout the election campaign. In the German Bundestag, he has basically ruled this out. But as I said, a day can make a lot of difference. And what I find interesting is that coming back to the blocking minority, that for a project like Next Generation EU, for example, a two-third majority in the German parliament was not necessary. But it was enough to have a simple majority. So it could open up possibilities that are newly attractive in the future. But I wouldn't necessarily count on this. Also, because I don't really see all 27 on board Next Generation EU defense attempt. I see that we have huge problems with, for example, Hungary, and that the current debate is more leading towards maybe a fund outside the EU budget structures. And this would not make the EU basically the unit that takes on the debt, but again, the member states, which would bring back the problem of the debt brake.
All right, thank you so much. Now, before we move on to our other panelists, I want to ask us all a poll as well. So we have come up with one question, and the question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge for Germany's next government and its EU policy? For those joining us on YouTube, you won't be able to participate in the poll, but the choices that you can say in terms of the topics: security and defense, economic growth and trade, climate policy and the green transformation, democracy and the rule of law, or last but not least, EU reform and enlargement. What do you think is the biggest challenge for Germany's next government and its EU policy? Give it a couple more seconds before we close the poll. There is no all of the above option. You're gonna have to pick one. All right, let's close the poll. Do we have a result, Paul? All right, yes. 32% said security and defense in first place. Second place, we have climate policy and the green transformation with 27%. Third place, democracy and the rule of law with 22%. So those are the top three. And then economic growth and trade come with 15%, and EU reform and enlargement, an issue that was actually, I would argue, quite relatively high up the agenda maybe a year ago, only 3%. So 7 voted for that issue. Fantastic. Looking at that, I mean, let's moving on to our panel discussion. Let me start with you, Sven Giegold. Sven, since November 2024, you are now the vice chair of the German Green Party. Before that, you were state secretary at the economics ministry. Your fundamental issues that you were working on, economic policy, Europe, SMEs. And of course, you also have experience in the European Parliament. You were there from 2009 to 2021, and you were the spokesperson also of the German Green delegation. Sven, it's great to have you. How do you feel about those election results, and what do they mean for Europe in your view?
Well, of course, we were not happy. I was not happy. Robert was even more unhappy. So our lead candidate, we had hoped for more. And in particular, of course, we wanted to pursue some of our governmental projects, which we can't now. Therefore, don't see me with a happy face. Yesterday, we had a call with the party leaders from the different green parties in Europe, and everybody told us, heads up. All the other green parties which were elected out of government did worse than we did. Anyway, that doesn't make us happy. And of course, the result is part of a different, say, a conjuncture of topics, of main topics, not only in Germany, but in many Western democracies. So climate has been in a certain way forgotten or put at third, fourth place in the magnitude of importance of topics, while security and defense, the economic situation, migration, and concerns about inflation have risen in importance. So seeing that overall atmosphere, perhaps we could have even done worse. Anyway, when it comes to Europe, first I have to stress that we pushed a lot on the need of deepening European integration more than Greens ever did. And we were the only party which has put this so high up our agenda. So this has also contributed to keep Volt out of parliament, which did very well in the European elections, which was basically without importance. And there's one positive element I would like to stress in this election, that the strength of the AfD and the extreme right is, of course, extremely bitter. However, on the political left, the project to construct a leftist nationalist party along the lines of Mélenchon in France, and that failed. And I think the probability is high that it failed forever, which I personally am very satisfied with. I have never understood how nationalism and leftism can be combined intellectually. What does it mean for Europe? Well, I think I agree. Merz has been committed pro-European over the last years, but his rhetoric and the need for coordination on the European level is one thing. When it came to policies, in particular those which meant real investment, money, but also sharing of competences. The program of the CDU-CSU is much more vague. It had no importance. Often it was the typical logic of a European on holidays and celebrations. So you celebrate Europe, but when it comes to discussing how to finance it, you are against everything. So no new debt instruments, very careful on common taxation instruments, and also no strong readiness to share more sovereignty on the European level. This is so important because we have not only the security and defense challenge, but we are under very strong competition for future investment, also in green tech, and that means we need to take the Draghi report seriously, to use the common market for innovation and future technology. But this also means that we need to build a more pro-European structure of legislation and supervision, as well as common investment programs for industrial policy. And that is so far very much unclear whether Merz is open to go that route. So far, he was rather skeptical. On defense, I fully agree with Jana, with the only exemption that I would say true, the difficulties with the two-thirds majority ironically make a European solution for the financing of defense more likely. And this can be done even with a group of countries inside of the European budget. That is very important because the logic, if Hungary is against, we have to go down a more complicated and less democratic route. I would not agree. I would say also a group of member states can act together in the framework of the European budget. And this is what at least German Greens would prefer.
If I can follow up with one question, Sven. We saw on the poll that climate policy and green transformation is also playing a big role, was the second most voted option. And today we also have the Clean Industrial Deal, we have the omnibus package of simplification. How do you see a grand coalition between the Conservatives and Social Democrats work on these files in the EU?
So first, I have to say the Clean Industrial Deal, I think the Commission made a good proposal. However, the issue how to finance common industrial projects is unclear. And the same we have, of course, on the defense side. Who will win in a situation of responsibility in a new coalition? Very hard to foresee. And as Jana said, one day can make a lot of difference. One coalition negotiation can make even more of a difference. And it's obvious that the economic problems of Germany can best be overcome by strengthening the common market and the strength of Europe as a whole. So therefore, I have some hopes that also German industry will push for more priority on economic cooperation. So, and when it comes to climate itself, Merz has pushed a lot for less bureaucracy in the Green Deal. And today the Commission has also proposed basically to kill the due diligence directive, which means that the first victim of less bureaucracy are the poor working for imports like coffee, T-shirts, and many other products in the name of less bureaucracy. This is unfortunately also due to the pressure of Merz before on Ursula von der Leyen, and less bureaucracy in order to achieve climate and other environmental and social policy objectives, yes. Less bureaucracy as an argument to have a more exploitatory economy, no. And that is a line we will insist upon.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think this is a good point to bring in Leonore as well, because you, Leonore, have been working on two big issues that have been immense fights, environmental policy. We all remember the nature restoration law vote, where your vote was crucial. And of course, fighting the far right in the question of democracy and rule of law, which is a particular issue as well in Austria. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us as well. You're well known in Europe, so I don't think I need to do a grand introduction, but just briefly, you're a member of the National Council of Austria since 2019, Minister for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology since 2020, And of course, prior to that, you were also director of our sister foundation, the Green European Foundation. Leonore, it's great to have you. When you look to your neighbor and the German election results, how much does that remind you of Austria, and what does it mean for Europe?
Well, there's a long list of similarities, but probably also some notable differences. But first of all, thanks a lot for having me. Hello to my former office neighbor in Brussels, who I have the honor to be moderated by. And hello to Sven, from party vice chair to party vice chair. Let me also pay respect to the German Green election result, even though I know all of our election results are not there to be celebrated. But if I look at the momentum you managed to generate with 40,000 new members, new party members, I think that's something to build on to grow on. And we all look at that as a big source of inspiration, also in difficult times for green policy and for green parties, as you can see throughout Europe. Of course, if I look at the election result, there's a lot of similarities. Being held accountable for a very unpopular government, the same situation in Austria, a shift to the right, in our case, an even more massive shift to the far right, with the FPÖ, our far right party, becoming the largest parliamentary fraction in Austria and even close to securing chancellorship. I'll get back to that. With one difference, though, in our case, the far right, there's no equivalent to the left or Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht in Austria in parliament, or as a relevant force outside. There's no constitutional blocking minority by the extremes. So we do have a situation where the democratic parties of the center left, center right, left right are still in a position to have also a constitutional majority to bring about the reforms that are needed. And without doubt, we live in exceptionally challenging times. And you mentioned all the challenges in your poll. I would say at least the top three cannot be separated from each other. You cannot think security without thinking a stable climate system. You cannot think successful economy without managing the transformation. So, but anyway, the list of challenges is long. And the question is, or the situation, and maybe even paradoxical situation also that the Austrian Greens find themselves in now, is that the once dominant parties, the not so grand coalition anymore, they need to find common ground and bring about these big solutions, bold, far-reaching decisions to address the actual root causes of these challenges and not just the symptoms that we witness. And of course, these are difficult compromises. These are often unpopular measures or things that we have a common task to explain, to gather support for. But of course, we are in a situation where the far right manages to generate a lot of power from that. And if we don't manage these compromises, we don't address the root causes. If we do the compromises, we might even run in a situation that the far right comes out stronger than before. And in this difficult political situation across Europe, the Greens have a particularly important but also challenging role to play, because at the one hand side, we are the ones who are ready to take responsibility, who are ready to accept the big challenges and also propose big transformatory solutions to these challenges. But on the other hand, and then also try to build these majorities and support these majorities. In Austria will be needed for every single constitutional majority in this current parliament. On the other hand, we also need to be extremely vocal and highly vigilant and voice the criticism when it's about, as Sven also outlined, rolling back the Green Deal, rolling back the achievements that we managed, especially in climate and nature protection or in safeguarding our democracy. And there's a lot at stake. And there's maybe, or I hope so, let's see, one difference between Austria and Germany. Also in Austria, we had a long debate before the election and big promises by the Conservative Party, our still, but I tend to say now former coalition partner, the ÖVP. They will never have a coalition with the FPÖ, with the far right. We ended up in coalition negotiations between the center-right and the far right. The far right ally of Viktor Orban was one step from chancellorship in Austria. We all together managed to avoid this situation, but it means, or maybe it's another indicator, that conservative parties have shifted. And I would love to share Jana's optimism that Friedrich Merz's pro-European standing is sincere and is there. But if you look at the time of strong party heads in conservative parties is over, both in Germany and in Austria, as was part of your thesis, and that the parties themselves have changed, then I must take today's proposal as a bad indication. Because if we now see that Friedrich Merz, the same majority who voted the corporate sustainability due diligence regulation, the conservative MEPs were part of this vote, now vote to dismantle it, then within only 2 years, a lot has changed, obviously, in these parties. And so we have to be highly vigilant that what comes out of policy in this European stance remains committed to really a future-oriented policy making, and not just slashing environmental and climate policies for a deregulation and anti-bureaucracy rhetoric, which Friedrich Merz obviously took pride in advancing along the lines of, yes, Trump and the likes.
This is a really good point, which I would love to take and bring with us later into the panel debate. But before I do that, let me introduce Jeanette Süß, because one of the key relationships in Europe is, of course, the French-German motor. And so we'd love to hear also how France looks at this German election results and what France believes it means for European policy. Jeanette, you're a research fellow at the Study Committee on Franco-German Relations at the French Institute of International Relations. Before that, you were with another Stiftung, the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung, and also with the Expert Council on Integration and Migration. Jeanette, it's great to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Roderick. Thanks for the invitation. So yeah, the German elections were, of course, narrowly observed and depicted by French media, by French politicians. One of the major interests from French viewpoint was, of course, the rise of AfD, as in France, as you know, Rassemblement National is also quite high, quite well represented already in the French National Assembly. Of course, the situation is a bit different in France, as you know. We have been witnessing really a very unstable political situation in the last months, leading to a reshuffle of the governments, even twice. So we have a minority government, and this is not exactly the same situation that we're having now in Germany, fortunately, because of the political system. So I think there's a huge understanding or willingness to understand the German political system, which is quite complex, with 2 votes, the compromise culture, the need to form a stable government. And as Jana put it out at the beginning, yeah, we have a grand coalition, but it's not so big anymore. So there's a lot of interest towards the question, like, what's the leverage now of AfD? To what extent can it, although it's of course not in government, but still influence German policymaking? And a certain fear that this normalisation, dédiabolisation, that you put it in French, like this normalization of far-right parties, could lead to major reshuffle of the political landscape in Germany. There's also a question, as you're organizing this from Brussels, how the dynamic that AfD unfolded in this election might have repercussions on the European sphere, especially in the European Parliament. Because as you know, AfD has been excluded to work with Rassemblement National. They were in the same political group before, ID, and now they're in two different groups. So there's also the question whether Rassemblement National might be willing to include AfD again. I don't think so, because AfD just decided to integrate Maximilian Krah, who was the lead candidate back in the day in 2024, in the political group in the Bundestag, which might dislike Rassemblement National. And there's other aspects we could look into, but that's really the main question. I think it's good that you're doing an event with Böll-Stiftung, also talking about the role of the Greens, because it's true that the role of the Greens, as well as the role of FDP, so the Liberal Party, and BSW, were parties that were not paid that much attention, because everything was overshadowed by the discussion on AfD. And I think from Franco-German viewpoint, that's also interesting to see what were the struggles and to do like a proper analysis for the Green Party in Germany, so that the French Greens can learn from that. And maybe coming back to the question of what are the repercussions for European policymaking, I just would like to make 2 points here. Coming back to Friedrich Merz, of course, who will be the chancellor of the new government. There's two major key concepts in French European policymaking I see that are still quite important, which is the concept of Europe puissance and Europe qui protège. So Europe puissance is really like this idea of having a stronger European Union, especially when it comes to foreign and security policy. And I think we can all agree that with Friedrich Merz as the new chancellor, he's pretty much aligned with this vision of Emmanuel Macron that he put out in the Sorbonne speech, but also with the overall more French concept of Europe puissance. So here we can really, or we can potentially see a bit more of leeway when it comes to developing this concept. But here, of course, the crucial question will be the Zeitenwende, the military expenses, and whether there can be kind of like Zeitenwende 2.0. Could it be like a Zeitenwende à la française, even if I can put it like that, meaning that there has been a lot of criticism from the French side towards Germany, especially towards SPD and Chancellor Scholz, to invest massively in American arms and infrastructure and decline the Zeitenwende, or that it materializes via strengthened transatlantic relations rather than a European approach. And I think now we're really at the crossroads where the big question will be, can we do a second round of Zeitenwende in a more European way? I think, we're good to go, but a lot of unanswered questions are on the table right now, and we don't have a lot of elements so far, like concretely speaking, how this can be done. The second point that I already mentioned, like the Europe qui protège, like a Europe that protects, is a bit more of a concept where I don't see 100% alignment between a future Chancellor Merz and Macron. You already have been mentioning, some of the panelists have been mentioning, for example, the due diligence directive. There's other topics, but what I find is striking is that even Macron, but also even Robert Habeck, when he was Minister of the Economy, said that we should put it on hold. And this is a burden for the economy, although it was under the French presidency that the European directive was promoted. And then also in Germany, of course, under SPD and Greens, especially, there was a German law that was put into place before the European directive even, and now we're going back on that. So I have like a big question mark on this whole Europe that protects concept, which does not only include, of course, these questions of due diligence, but also other questions like the question of resilience, and also in terms of economic policy, from a French viewpoint, a more protectionist approach, of course, which will be very important when it comes to the way we're going to counteract American approach with the tariffs, so on and so forth. Where on the other hand, we have Germany that is, of course, way more dependent on exports, way more pro-business, way more pro-transatlantic. So there, a big question mark from my side, how this is going to translate into a new policy approach where Germany and France could align even more. So that's in a nutshell, I think, the biggest rather questions than answers I'm having right now, but some of the observations that at least from my side and from a Franco-German viewpoint. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeanette. I've taken copious notes, and I think those are really good points that we'll bring with us into the panel debate. But last, but certainly not least, we went west first. Now we're going a little bit to the east of Germany, to the other neighbor. We have with us Jolanta Szymanska. Jolanta, it's great to have you. You are the head of the European Union program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. You've worked on migration policy and home affairs and the institutional system of the EU, and are, of course, also an author of many scientific publications on the political system of the EU. It's great to have you, Jolanta. Olaf Scholz and Donald Tusk, I don't think they got on very well. Do you think it's going to get better under Friedrich Merz now? And how does Poland look at the German election?
Well, thank you for having me. What I can say from the Polish point of view, from the actually point of view of Polish government, is that election result in Germany is good news for Poland. But I think also it's seen as a good information for European Union as such. First, because Friedrich Merz has a chance to create a stable coalition with SPD, and the lack of stable government in Germany was a problem not only for Poland, but as a country of presidency now. But I think for all the politicians that had an ambition to reform the European Union. Merz already established close contacts with Poland and also with France. So it's also a good sign that we can reinvigorate the cooperation within the Weimar Triangle as an engine for the ambitious agenda in the European Union. And Polish government is very much focused on the Weimar Triangle. And recently, with Chancellor Scholz, it was really difficult to push this cooperation within the format. And this change of the government, hopefully this government will be created very soon, because still we have to wait. But this change is seen positively also because Prime Minister Tusk and new Chancellor belong to the same party in the European Union. So they have quite good relation and generally very similar views on Europe, what they can call as a more pragmatic, realistic vision of the European cooperation, favoring more intergovernmental cooperation than the supranational, but they also have to some extent similar situation in domestic politics, because they managed to win the elections, but they have to form a coalition, and the coalition governments are always kind of more complicated, and they need to face also internally the rise of far-right movements. So they need to take into consideration the changing narrative in a society, but also the rise of the far right in national parliaments. So I think they will be more understanding between both governments because of similarity when it comes to conditions, internal domestic conditions. What Warsaw expects from Berlin is, I think, mainly the commitment to more European defense spending, including the EU-level funds and more support for Ukraine. So this is quite obvious, I think. And what Jana mentioned and what we also discuss currently in Poland is this issue of the a so-called debt break and the lack of majority to reform this debt break in Germany. So this may be potentially a kind of problem for increasing this defense spending. What is also potentially worrying from the Polish point of view is the migration policy, and here we have also very similar situation because both governments, I mean, Polish government is also showing a rather harsh stand on migration, and what is actually this is what Merz government will probably do also, but as we are neighbor countries, we have a problem with the introducing internal controls on Polish-German border and potential of sending migrants from to Poland from Germany, from the German border. So here in migration policy, I see potentially a kind of problematic zone, but generally speaking, when it comes to other policies, also when it comes to, for example, climate policy, the view from Warsaw and Germany now seems to be more and more similar. So as I mentioned, we rather, I mean, the Polish government here sees this change as a rather positive one and hopes for a good cooperation.
Great, thank you so much, Jolanta. If I can ask all of our panelists to step on the virtual stage, I have a whole bunch of questions, and there is also lots of questions in the chat. But first, I think I want to give the floor back to where we started with you, Jana, because there were a couple of points that I thought were particularly interesting. You mentioned in your input that Merz did not manage to get the 30+%, and that he might therefore be weakened inside his own party, you know, Markus Söder, Hendrik Wüst, and others. And Leonore, you made the very interesting point that Merz might, on the European level, be driven by other European leaders, be it Orban, Meloni, or other forces within the different political parties and constellations. How do you view that, Jana? To what extent is this going to affect Friedrich Merz in his Europe policy?
So we need to be realistic here. I think Friedrich Merz has already opened up to working with, for example, Giorgia Meloni quite significantly. There was a shift, but that happened already prior to the federal election. That was already prior to the European election. And it happened under the initiative of Manfred Weber. The EPP has basically designed three criteria under which the EPP parties could work with parties to their right. One of the conditions was that those parties need to be not up for dismantling the EU, at least not out in the open, that they need to be critical of Russia or support basically the EU's course on Russia, and be also supportive of NATO and the transatlantic alliance. That was the old dictum, I think, that we've seen. And so Merz opened up to working with Meloni. I think in Germany, she might even be considered as a possible interlocutor with the Trump administration. The relationship with Orban is yet different, and with Germany's AfD yet different again. What I think we should not underestimate is the pressure that is now coming from the United States, that particularly from, I mean, everybody, Elon Musk and JD Vance have been most vocal, but it is clear by what they are saying that they are basically targeting conservative parties in Europe particularly, and want to force them or push them to open up to working with European right-wing populist parties. We have seen this attempt quite clearly in Munich with the Vance speech, but also in consecutive remarks that he made, for example, during the CPAC conference just now, where he basically Vance linked the readiness of American troops to defend Germany with kind of Germany's cancel culture, or that's what they would call it. And so there is a lot of pressure, I think, on Merz on several fronts. Also within Germany, because of the huge success of the AfD throughout Germany, particularly in the former GDR, but I think we should not limit it to this. If we look at basically preferences, we see that the AfD has also gotten a lot of votes in southern and western Germany. And so, but especially in the East, they have been above 30% everywhere, and some parts above 40 or 50%. So that makes it, I think, realistically quite impossible, I think, in the long run to keep up the firewall, especially not at the federal level immediately, but at the local level when it comes to states. So I see that more and more crumbling, and I see an immense pressure on Merz now, because if he enters a coalition with the SPD, the AfD will be the thorn in his flesh and constantly remind him that if he continues to govern with a socialist party, he will never implement a conservative policy. So I don't want to be in his shoes. But I think we might disagree, and maybe I still give him too much credit, but I think that when he says that he doesn't want to enter a coalition with the AfD, this is genuine. But then again, I would have never expected him to make that move in the German parliament on migration. So maybe.
And I want to follow up on that, because we have a question in the chat on exactly that issue. Christian Berner asked to what extent Merz could do what Manfred Weber is sometimes doing in the European Parliament, where he says, well, if you don't want to vote on my proposals, I'll just go with the more extreme right, from ECR to Patriots to even the sovereigntists. Do you think that's an option in the German Bundestag?
Again, I might be too idealistic, or I might still believe too much into the... I think Friedrich Merz is a believer in Western values at heart, not kind of a romanticist vis-a-vis the United States, but I think he really believes in certain principles. And I think we will not see another attempt to blackmail basically the SPD, and then by threatening the SPD with kind of, if you don't agree with me on migration, that would be the end of the coalition immediately, I think, and that would lead to a minority government in Germany, and I think he doesn't want that. So I don't see that yet. I see the pressure more coming really from kind of the different regions and the states and the local level, and then kind of that we see the firewall eroding. I mean, we've already seen it eroding kind of when it comes to mayors and stuff like that.
I want to bring in you, Sven, on this issue. I mean, how do you see this of the erosion of the firewall? And also, we had a question in the chat of the role of Die Linke in this blocking minority. Will there be a constructive opposition or a fundamental opposition? And maybe if you could say a few words on the role of the Greens in opposition as well, I think that would be interesting.
So when it comes to the firewall, I would say this is still more or less holding. Also, you could see the strong reaction of civil society with this test. And when you have basically a big coalition not upholding the firewall, that would certainly lead to mass demonstrations. Not in one city, everywhere in Germany. And therefore, Jana may be right that perhaps in the future the reaction will be less strong, but we could see what happened if the conservatives go too far to the right. Remember the period when the CSU in Bavaria was entering a strong anti-migration rhetoric, and the reaction of Bavarian voters was moving to Greens and strengthening the center-left. So therefore, for exactly as you were saying, the conservatives would pay a very high price, and this is not well, a pleasant pair of shoes to be in. So as you were putting it, it's so our role certainly is a bit more difficult because we have on the one side a radical right opposition, and on the other side a populist left. And German Greens are in government in many of the Länder governments still, and we want to continue to do so. And therefore, we will certainly be an opposition which will stay realistic in the sense that the yardstick for what we are demanding, what we're suggesting, is that this is policies which can happen in the real world. This is a test which regularly many of the positions of the radical left fail. So they deny the situation on security. They are, as Danny Cohn-Bendit put it, a neo-imperialist force when it comes to Ukraine, and complacency to let them alone, at least when it comes to weapons. Without weapons, you can't defend yourself. And on economic issues, the left party has taken positions which would certainly bust the German economy. So if you increase taxes massively in a crisis, this will not turn out in a stabilization or new growth. So therefore, the test has to be still to be a realistic and constructive opposition, while at the same time speaking more to those social movements and civil society organizations where Greens came from. So in the last years, we often tried every argument, every proposal to portray it in a way that it pleases voters of conservatives, socialists, liberals, but too often we did not dare to be ourselves. And so we defend nature, the climate for its own sake. We are in favor of migration to Germany, and we should say so because the German economy needs it. And therefore, there are on many fronts, Greens have to rediscover to be themselves, while at the same time still trying to appeal to the middle of society politically. So I think we can do that both, and that's not a contradiction.
I want to turn to you, Leonore, with two questions there. One question in the chat from Klaus Jongeblut from the German Environment Stiftung Foundation is about the Green Deal. And you and Sven, very well described the kind of attacks against the Green Deal, this deregulation agenda, this, get rid of bureaucracy agenda. But maybe we can look at how can we still continue the Green Deal agenda? Who are allies that are still working on this agenda, on the green transformation? And how can this be pushed forward? And the second question goes a little bit to this question of the firewall. Maybe again, from your experience in Austria, how do green parties deal with this situation? There is a question in the chat asking, do green parties need to band up together with left parties and become one unified force, like they have done in France for one election? And I'll come to you, Jeanette, on that later. Like they have done in the Netherlands, where PvdA and GroenLinks went together. So Green Deal and political alliances. I'd love to hear your views on that, Leonore.
Well, thanks a lot for the question. When I listened to Sven, I had to think of a debate we had in Austria after my vote on Restore Nature. The Conservative Party, the ÖVP, said the Greens showed their real face. And I said very proudly, so yes, we fight for what we've been voted for, and we take the content we've been voted for seriously. In terms of the Green Deal, I think today is actually a pretty good day to discuss this. And if we look at the proposals that we had now for the Clean Industrial Deal, there's good sides in that, especially in terms of also securing a climate goal for 2040. But if we look at the omnibus regulation that came along with it, then you can only describe it as a full-fledged attack on the Green Deal under the pretext of deregulation, under the pretext of bureaucracy. Don't misunderstand me. I will find, and Sven and I will find, and a lot of people fighting for the Green Deal will find options to reduce bureaucracy. But I wonder why we only find them in environmental policy. It's only targeting the downscaling of environmental standards, as Sven very rightly put it, it's nature, it's workers, it's children paying the price for this. And we need to be better than that. And that is why my worry comes from also with this German election result, because while I take Friedrich Merz for face value when he says he's not being naive in our relationship to the US and Europe needs to find strength and independence even. He put it like that from the US. But if I look at the rest of the discourse, we're going into a completely false choice between defense, competitiveness, and the transformation agenda, the Green Deal and climate protection. This is no either or. This can only work if we tackle all of this together. And so I think in the question of, and one of the key questions in this will be both the debate on the fiscal rules and the financing at the European level, but also at the German level, the question of the debt brake. If we start limiting this only to the defense policy, we ignore that there are structural needs to solve big crises on the other side as well. So we need to make sure that we are the voice calling to broaden that debate. And I am sure we have allies in this. And of course, one of the most prominent, or even maybe the example where I'm sure we'll also still find broad majorities in the European Parliament or in national parliament, is the switch to renewable energy. I'm looking to Poland now, and we will not go into the nuclear side of things. There I have a strong point on that. But on the renewable side, there's, for example, broad majorities possible, and I think there it's on Greens to also look for them, to push for them, to continue to push for the agenda. But that's exactly this fine line that Sven described. between being a constructive and opposition building things, not destroying things, but also a very vigilant and vocal and a strong one on saying we're not going back. We're not going back to the place we for good reasons left behind. In terms of the party political standpoint, I mean, I will not. Jeanette is a lot better placed for the French reality, but I think the French agreements is to a large extent due to an election system that doesn't make it easy for small parties to even gain seats in parliament. That, of course, in our representative system is different. I'm here as a vice chair for the Green Party, proudly so, and convinced to the bottom of my heart that the answers that the Green Party provides are at the height of our time and are much needed. And if you look at what's happening in this world, from the Elon Musks of our time to Trump to Putin and the whole situation in Ukraine now, between Trump and Putin, you can have a long list. I think our answers are more needed than ever. But we also need to look at ourselves to see how can we make sure we're understood, and how can we make sure that we're also elected again, that we're also voted for again in stronger numbers than before in the last elections. And that's our homework there to do. But I think a distinct green voice is much needed in times like these.
I'll pass over to you, Jeanette, about the political constellation and the camp of the left. But one of the questions I do want to pick up, and I will ask to you, Jolanta, and then going back to you, Jana, as well, is the question of financing and also the European budget, the question of the MFF that's coming up next year. And one of the questions that we have in the chat is also Europe needs to build up a security force. It needs to deter Russia. Will it be able to do so? And how does it all take place in the context of Donald Trump and his presidency? But before going to you, Jolanta, Jeanette, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for this question. I think it's one of the $1 million questions at the table right now, how to finance all this. Brügge estimated that we would need like 200 billion a year to finance European defense policy thoroughly. So that's quite a bunch of money. And as was already put out in the discussion under Friedrich Merz, a joint debt, European debts are rather improbable. So once this was discussed several months ago, and there was this question in the European Commission. Merz already said that this is not an option for him. Now, on the other hand, we see an opening in the discussion concerning debt brake, and of course, this discussion around exempting defense spending within the Stability and Growth Pact. So I think we will rather see like more technical solutions like that, tinkering a bit with these modalities rather than a huge European debt program, which would kind of play in the hands of the right parts of former CDU voters that might have voted for AfD. So I think this is also like this would come at quite high costs for CDU to justify, but never say no, as Jana put it. Every day you have new positions coming up from the future potential German government. Of course, from a French viewpoint, this would be highly welcomed. France is, of course, one of the major defenders of more European deficit spending, and also this exemption clauses, which might then lower the pressure a bit on its own debt procedure, which is already ongoing, right, by the European Commission. So this is also one of the key questions in terms of credibility, and Friedrich Merz pointed that out several times. Germany has a leading role when it comes to the European partners, and if Germany doesn't respect the Growth and Stability Pact, who should? So there's also a question of credibility in here, and also in comparison to France, I mean, the kind of like the deal was that Germany was hoping that Emmanuel Macron would realize significant economic reforms, which he did in part, but he didn't really manage to have solid budgetary situation. So we have this debt crisis in France. So on the one hand, it's time to massively spend in defense, and on the other hand, Germany clearly wants to avoid like a domino effect by making it too easy, especially for the Southern European countries, to find like excuses to not comply with the criteria anymore of the Stability and Growth Pact.
Jolanta, over to you. And if I can add one question there, this question of the security force or a European force. During the German election campaign, there was a gentleman's agreement between the lead candidates from the center ground parties that we would not talk and not debate the question of a European troop presence in Ukraine to secure a kind of ceasefire. I would be interested to hear also what the discussion is in Poland on this. If you can say maybe a few words. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So maybe let me start from the question about MFF and defense spending at the European level. They are both at the very heart of Polish presidency. Last week, I was actually moderating the first discussion of European senior experts on the next MFF, and the question how we design and how much we are going to spend for, among the others, the defense is a crucial question that we need to address. The Polish point of view is that we should increase both national contributions. We should create new own resources of the European Union, and we are also open for a discussion about debt in the European Union. But my impression from this conference was that we are really at the very beginning of this discussion, and that some arguments are of member states are from the past, so to say. I mean, that they don't take really seriously this new situation into account, and the urgency of the situation. And what is the question about defense? I mean, the answer of the Polish government is that we should not think about creation of the common army or this kind of things. We should first think about money for defense. That's why all the activities of the Polish government, maybe not all, but a lot of activities under this presidency are focused on creating a kind of coalition of the willing of countries that are going to spend more on defense, both nationally and at the European level, or if not at the European level, so maybe somehow in a smaller format. So, this is how the question is seen in wars. But the question about sending troops to Ukraine, the Polish troops, is again very sensitive, mainly because of political campaign that we have before the presidential election. That's why what can be surprising for some observers in other member states, it's really difficult to anyone in Poland, any politician in Poland today, to say that, yeah, we are going to send troops, Polish soldiers to Ukraine. I mean, it's simply too dangerous politically. That's why I think this is a topic that we try to avoid in this public debate. There are some, some very, very hot topics like migration pact, like climate, like European Green Deal, or sending troops anywhere. They are always toxic, especially in Poland. So I would, if you need me to explain why, there is no message that yes, we are open for this kind of activity, then I would say that yeah, we cannot do it now because it's there is no support, there is no public support for this kind of activity. Well, so this is how it is.
All right, thank you. Jana, look, there's lots of different topics. You can pick and choose. I got two from the chat that I think that might be rapid fire answers that you can give. One is, should Merz insist on inviting Netanyahu despite the current ICG arrest warrants? And the other is in terms of defense companies, whether defense companies could not come together more and pool resources and do similar development and production like with the Eurofighter.
Maybe I take the second question because that connects to something that I wanted to say anyways, because I was very interested in what Sven mentioned in the very beginning when it comes to defense spending and possibilities on an EU level, because I think this is the crucial question for Germany and Europe, where to find the money. And Germany under Scholz has always emphasized that Germany wants to go national. And I think there is an opening for the EU level. And if you have a way how to do this within the EU budget, but with a coalition of the willing, I just don't know enough about this. And maybe you can elaborate on this a little more, because this could be actually a very good idea. So far, I had always understood that something like Next Gen EU demands a unilateral decision, and that if we want to do something in a coalition of the willing, we need to go outside the EU budget. So if you could explain this a bit more, because I think the EU level, I always thought it was the right level to address this question, but I think it could have could become more attractive now also for the new government. When it comes to defense companies, I think from a German perspective, there is always the problem that the programs and structures as they are currently at the EU level, when it comes, for example, to the European Defense Fund, are not considered to be attractive enough by many German companies. And they always, when you talk to them, complain that the German state doesn't do enough for them to make their case in Brussels, and that the when it comes to procurement, for example, it needs to be financed solely through German money, and basically the European level for a bureaucrat in the MOD is a hindrance and not an advantage. So it complicates things for him, and it doesn't make things easier for him. So I think the German system, I did a research how Germany reacts to the new defense industrial programs and packages, and I published it last year, and I encountered a lot of opposition, but also a lot of complaints, especially by defense companies, saying that the government hasn't done enough to basically implement those possibilities also in the national procurement process. What I think for industry would also help is something that it's, I think, difficult for, or has been difficult for many Greens. They want easier access to money. So they want the European Investment Bank to be more flexible and to set a precedence, because the problem is that many private banks don't lend money to defense companies because they are afraid of their rating. And this is a problem that needs to be addressed, in my opinion, to make it more attractive for private investment to invest in security and defense projects, and to make it easier for companies to find money. On Netanyahu, look, I think for me personally, this is a question that is very difficult because I believe in Germany's special responsibility for Israel, but also in Germany's commitment to international law. And Germany has made it very clear that it is going to honor international law and the verdicts of the International Criminal Court. And so I think to invite him to Germany at this point in time is not a good idea. I think Germany has lost already a lot of credibility, especially in the so-called Global South. I hear that very often when I talk to NGOs operating in the Global South. Also, I'm a member of the advisory board for civilian crisis prevention. So I'm in contact with a lot of organizations, that operate also in the region, and they say that the government completely underestimates how much soft power we've lost by what has been seen as being a too one-sided position. And I know that that is one of the reasons why I'm very happy to be a think tanker and to be able to, comment from the sidelines, because I don't want to downplay this. I think Annalena Baerbock actually has tried to strike this fine balance and has criticized also Israel behind the scenes quite a lot. But yeah, I think when it comes to being a friend of Israel, my personal private opinion is that good friends need to speak the truth to each other. And I think the Netanyahu government, there is a reason why it was so contested, even in Israel, why there were mass protests. And so I think we could not lower our standards. We need to hold governments accountable when it comes to rule of law everywhere. And so not a good idea, in my opinion.
All right, thank you so much. We're slowly starting to run out of time, so we'll just do one more round. I think we need to start with you, Sven, because you're going to show us how to get that to that European money that everybody needs.
Now, this is a long debate how to integrate into the EU budget projects which are not supported by all. And there are legal studies for the European Parliament. And of course, this is a priori possible. So you have already now some specific sub-budgets which do not bind all member states. So think of Schengen. Not all are parts of Schengen. There's also the example of the European Development Fund. And the more complicated issue comes with indebting for such a group of countries. And there's an EU law question and a national law question. When it comes to the EU law, my understanding is the model which has been taken for the post-corona efforts can be taken in principle inside of the budget, also only with a group of countries. So the principle in EU law that there can be enhanced cooperation whenever the Commission makes a proposal for all, but some do not agree to join. Therefore, this is all integral part of the European structure, including its budget. Another debate is the more German special debate about constitutionality of EU debt and whether there are limits to what the German constitution allows. And this is a very complicated debate where you have very conservative judges, which basically said in the past that already lots we are doing now, or what the ECB has been doing, is illegal under the German constitution. They didn't win in Karlsruhe yet. And there were certain security measures done in the Bundestag with certain voting thresholds and the like. And to this also belongs to do something rather intergovernmentally than in the EU framework. And to me, I'm not a lawyer. My understanding is that certainly some risk can be taken. Also, this is needed because in the end, if EU democracy is always decided in Karlsruhe, this causes the same anger in Europe as German special standards in Gaza, to put it with a small joke on a serious issue. And Jana, I have to agree with you fully that our reputation as a country which didn't have a colonial strong history internationally, and which could often play a constructive role when dealing with developing countries, that this has been harmed and recently. And of course, it's not acceptable to basically say we do not apply the law from the International Criminal Court. And I have to add, it's also legally doubtful whether some of our weapon exports can be reconciled with German and international law. So weapon exports to Israel.
If I can follow up, Sven, we got one question from Simon that has quite a lot of thumbs up. His question is, in the last Bundestag period, there was a cordon sanitaire with the AfD that they did not get any Bundestag committee chairs or deputy speaker positions. Do you think this will continue and this will stay?
Certainly, we think that nothing has changed. So still, some parts of the AfD are clearly verfassungsfeindlich, so against the German constitution. Legally, they can be called fascists. So to me, nothing has changed why they should have privileged roles in the parliament to which there is no constitutional right. Of course, the party can exert their constitutional right, while the majority in the parliament should give them any extra constitutional additional special privileges. I cannot see, and I doubt that Greens would support this.
All right, thank you. Leonore, and then Jeanette and Jolanta, what's the whole budget and debt debate in Austria like? And also this question of a European troop presence in Ukraine, is that an issue that's part of the Austrian debate?
Not yet no, because Austria as a military neutral country has obviously a different, by constitution, a different role to play in this. But as you see today, we had a debate in parliament, and being militarily neutral doesn't mean that you don't take a stance and that you're not solidly on the side of international law. And if there's in this conflict a clear aggressor breaking international law, then we know which side we stand on, and we know what our role is in supporting as much as possible Ukraine in this conflict. In terms of the financing, I've already said some things before. I think it's important that we that whether through new own resources, through joint bonds, or through other solutions, find solutions to actually finance the challenges that we are up to in the coming years. Because if we don't find answers to the challenges, we're only going to strengthen the parties who live off the problems and not of the solutions. And that's the far right, and that's maybe in the German case also, as Sven put it, the nationalist left, if there is a thing like that. But that's why this is it's not a technical question, it's a really core question for the future of the European Union.
And one last thought, in the last period, we've discussed a lot at the European level, the so-called German vote. In the German coalition being split and due to internal agreements or disagreements, not being able to take a position and so on and so on. We discussed it a lot. And of course, I know how hard Sven himself, Robert or Steffi or some others often fought the last minute intervention by Christian Lindner on wanting to overturn everything again. But that's good in that case, that there was a German vote in terms of having a solid and a good position at the European level in the end. And that's, I think, a bit my what we will look at very closely and how Friedrich Merz will position himself and will position a future German coalition at the European level, because it's not only about having a position, it's about having which kind of position. Will Germany be solid on the side of support for Ukraine defense EU budget? Okay, I give him a lot of credit for that, but will Germany work and continue to work to solve the big questions of our times and the structural problems of our economy? Because we need those deep reforms. We need the transformation to climate neutrality in order to make sure prosperity on this continent is going to sustain. And we would be a lot further with a future-proof automotive industry if it wasn't for conservative parties being stuck in combustion engine nostalgia and ideology. And so I think it will be it will be on us to make sure that this position in Germany doesn't, on some critical issues, doesn't remain stuck on buzzwords like combustion engines or technological openness, but actually...
We are running out of time. And I know, Jana and
Sorry.
Sven, you have to go because you have meetings coming up. So just very briefly, Jeanette, what's the top demand that France would like to see from Germany when it comes on European policy? See you, Jana.
Yeah, very quickly, and taking up of what Leonore just said, no German vote anymore. I think that's the most important thing. It's of course the willingness of all European partners, but especially when it comes to the very thorough coordination that we have between France and Germany. France often did not know what was the position of Germany. So I think that's the overall major claim.
Great. Jolanta, what about from Warsaw's side?
Well, I already mentioned in my first intervention, more support for Ukraine, more spending on defense, both internally and at the European level. So open mind when it comes to increasing defense spending at the European level and cooperation with this regard, especially when it comes to the next MFF.
All right. Thank you so much. We've arrived at the end of our webinar. It's been a pleasure to have so many interesting insights from Jana, Sven, Leonore, Jeanette, and Jolanta. Thank you so much all for joining us. Thank you for all the participants that were here in the Zoom room that asked lots of questions as well. Thank you for those of you who are on YouTube watching our webinar. And let me just close by saying that we will, of course, be following very closely the formation of a new German federal government and what that means for Europe and all things political here in Brussels. We're working on a lot of these issues, on industrial policy, on the Clean Industrial Deal. We have a piece out that was published today as well. We have a study on the omnibus simplification package. And last but not least, security and defense are, of course, also very big issues that we're working on, where we'll have a study published from Sophia Besch from the Carnegie Endowment next week as well. You can find all of those things on our website. You can sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss anything from our work. And last but not least, and that's really important as well, I would like to ask you for some feedback on our webinar. We have a poll, a survey that you will get to once you leave our Zoom room. And we'd really appreciate your honest feedback so we can make sure we cater to your needs, your interests. So please complete the survey. It doesn't take long. And very final point, a big thank you, of course, to all the colleagues that were involved in preparation of this webinar. All the colleagues here in the EU office in Brussels, thank you so much. The colleagues in Berlin at our division, the Europe North America department, the offices in Paris and Warsaw, this is always a team job. So thank you all for having helped out, and thanks our audience for joining us. Until next time, take care. Goodbye.